Grading papers late at night was never my favorite task, but tonight felt different. The school was eerily quiet. The only sound was the ticking clock in the teacher's lounge. Fluorescent lights flickered above, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. I sat alone at my desk, surrounded by stacks of history essays, the silence pressing in on me. As I flipped through the pages, a sudden noise caught my attention. Footsteps echoed down the empty hallway. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 11 p.m. on March 7th. Who else could be here at this hour? I muttered under my breath. Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. The hallway was dimly lit, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. I walked slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The footsteps had stopped, leaving me in complete silence again. I peered into each classroom, but they were all empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I continued down the corridor. Reaching the end of the hall, I found nothing out of the ordinary. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Returning to the teacher's lounge, I tried to focus on grading, but the uneasy feeling lingered, making it hard to concentrate. Every creak of the building seemed amplified, each shadow more sinister. Just as I began to relax, a soft rustling noise came from the supply closet next to the lounge. My pulse quickened. I tiptoed towards the closet, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, I flung the door open, revealing nothing but shelves of paper and office supplies. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling a bit foolish. I returned to my desk, determined to finish my work. But as the night wore on, the sense of being watched grew stronger. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows. I hurried out of the school, the events of March 7th haunting my thoughts. The next evening, March 8th, I found myself back in the school, determined to finish grading the essays. The unease from the previous night lingered, but I told myself it was just my imagination. The school was quiet again, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning. I settled into the teacher's lounge, the pile of papers daunting as ever. As I read through an essay, a faint tapping sound caught my attention. I looked up, scanning the room, but saw nothing unusual. The clock on the wall showed it was 10 p.m. I shook my head, trying to focus. But the tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I stood up, following the sound to the classroom next door. Inside the classroom, the desks were neatly arranged, nothing out of place. The tapping had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I felt a chill run down my spine as I checked each corner of the room. Finding nothing, I returned to the lounge, my nerves on edge. I sat down, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. As I resumed grading, I noticed a folded piece of paper on my desk that hadn't been there before. My heart raced as I unfolded it, revealing a hastily scribbled note. "Leave now." Panic surged through me. Who could have left this? Why? I glanced around the empty room, feeling more paranoid by the second. I considered leaving, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to stay and see if I could uncover the mystery. As the hours passed, the school grew colder, the shadows longer. Every noise seemed amplified, every creak sending my heart into my throat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, this time closer. My palms were sweaty as I gripped my pen, ready to defend myself if necessary. The footsteps stopped right outside the lounge door. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. But after a few tense moments, the footsteps retreated, leaving me in silence once more. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. I decided to pack up and leave, the note's warning echoing in my mind. As I locked up the school and stepped into the cool night air, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and intrigue. March 8th had ended with more questions than answers. By the third night, March 9th, I was both anxious and determined. I had to find out who or what was behind the strange occurrences. I arrived at the school earlier than usual, hoping to catch a glimpse of anything unusual before the eerie quiet of night settled in. The building was just as empty as before, the corridors echoing with my footsteps. I decided to take a different approach and started grading papers in the school library. The library was vast, with rows of bookshelves casting long shadows under the dim lighting. I settled at a table near the back, where I could see the entire room. The ticking clock on the wall reminded me of the passing time, now showing 9 p.m. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, I glanced up, expecting to see someone peering around the corner. Instead, I was met with the same empty aisles. An hour passed, and just when I began to think the night would be uneventful, I heard a faint whispering. I froze, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, seeming to come from the back of the library. My heart pounded as I cautiously made my way toward the sound. The whispering stopped abruptly as I reached a shelf filled with dusty old books. I scanned the titles, my fingers brushing against the spines, and noticed one book slightly ajar. I pulled it out, revealing a small hidden door behind the shelf. My curiosity piqued. I opened the door and found a narrow, dusty passageway. The air was cold and musty as I stepped inside, the walls lined with cobwebs. The passage led to a small, hidden room, barely larger than a closet. Inside, I found an old diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. I opened it, revealing the scrawled handwriting of a former student named Emily, dating back decades. Emily's diary entries told a chilling tale of secrets and cover-ups, hinting at something dark hidden within the school's history. My fear mixed with determination as I read on, feeling a strange connection to the past events. The whispering began again, sending chills down my spine. I looked around the small room, but it was empty. Realizing I had been in the passageway for too long, I hurried back to the library, the diary clutched tightly in my hands. As I left the library, I heard the footsteps again, this time more distant. It was now past midnight, and I knew I had to leave. I exited the school, my mind racing with the revelations from the diary. March 9th had given me more pieces to the puzzle, but I still needed answers. The night's events haunted my thoughts as I drove home, determined to return the next day to uncover the full truth. The next night, March 10th, I returned to the school, determined to follow the clues in Emily's diary. I arrived earlier, while there was still some daylight, hoping to avoid the unsettling darkness. As the sun set, I found myself drawn back to the library and the hidden passage. The air was thick with anticipation as I retraced my steps. Entering the hidden passage once more, I felt a mix of fear and resolve. I carried a flashlight this time, its beam cutting through the darkness. The small hidden room felt even colder tonight. I opened the diary again, reading Emily's final entries. She wrote about discovering a secret society within the school and her fear of what they might do if she exposed them. Suddenly, the whispering returned, louder and more urgent. I swung the flashlight around, but the beam revealed nothing but dust and shadows. My heart raced as I continued reading, desperate for more clues. Emily mentioned a meeting place, an old forgotten classroom in the basement. I had to find it. Leaving the hidden room, I made my way to the basement. The steps creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder as I descended. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and old equipment, all covered in layers of dust. I searched for the classroom Emily had described, my flashlight flickering ominously. Finally, I found a door at the far end of the basement, marked with a faded number. My hand trembled as I turned the knob, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was exactly as Emily had described. Rows of old desks, a chalkboard with faded writing, and a large table in the center. On the table were various documents and photos, evidence of the secret society's activities. As I examined the documents, a sense of dread washed over me. The society had been manipulating events at the school for years, hiding their actions in plain sight. I took photos of the evidence with my phone, determined to expose the truth. The whispering grew louder, almost as if warning me to leave. I quickly gathered as much evidence as I could and exited the basement. The school was eerily quiet as I made my way back to the main floor. The feeling of being watched intensified, but I pushed through, determined to bring the truth to light. I locked up the school and left, the weight of the night's discoveries heavy on my mind. March 10th had revealed the sinister truth behind the school's history, but I knew my journey wasn't over. I needed to confront the principal and ensure the school's dark past was exposed. On the morning of March 11th, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The evidence I had gathered needed to be brought to light. I arrived at the school just before dawn, determined to confront the principal. The halls were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I walked into the principal's office, finding Mr. Thompson already at his desk, sipping his morning coffee. He looked up, surprised to see me so early. "Mr. Johnson, what brings you here at this hour?" he asked, his tone curious but guarded. I placed the diary and the photos on his desk, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to shock. "This is what's been happening in our school," I said, my voice steady but firm. "The secret society, the manipulation, it's all here. We need to address this and make it right." Mr. Thompson's face turned pale as he skimmed through the evidence. He sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "I had no idea," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. This has been going on for decades. We need to put an end to it." As we discussed the next steps, the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow through the office windows. The school's dark secrets were finally coming to light. Mr. Thompson agreed to call an emergency meeting with the school board and local authorities. Together, we would ensure the secret society's actions were exposed and justice was served. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings and investigations. The authorities took the evidence seriously, launching a full-scale inquiry into the school's history. The secret society members were identified and held accountable for their actions. The school's reputation began to heal as the truth spread. On March 14th, just a few days after the initial discovery, a special assembly was held to inform the students and staff about the findings. As I stood before the gathered crowd, I felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. The school was finally free from the shadows of its past. As the assembly ended, students and teachers approached me, thanking me for uncovering the truth. I felt a deep sense of connection and pride in my role as an educator. The fear and unease that had haunted me for days were replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and community. The events of March 11th marked a turning point for our school. Together, we had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. I knew that moving forward, we would be more vigilant and united, ensuring that our school remained a safe and nurturing environment for everyone. Grading papers on the night of November 8th felt like a routine task, but something about that evening was different. The classroom was dimly lit, with the heavy rain outside casting a gloomy atmosphere. I sat at my desk, the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm. As I sifted through the essays, I noticed a strange shadow outside the window. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced at the clock. It was 9 p.m. Trying to dismiss my unease, I focused on my work, but the shadow lingered in my mind. The school was supposed to be empty at this hour. Minutes passed, and the shadow reappeared, moving closer. I stood up, peering out into the darkness, but the rain obscured my view. Shaking my head, I returned to my desk, chalking it up to a trick of the light. Still, the sense of unease clung to me, making it hard to concentrate. The classroom felt colder, the shadows deeper. As I graded another essay, a soft creaking sound echoed through the hallway. I froze, listening intently. The creaking grew louder, as if someone or something was slowly approaching. My pulse quickened, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to investigate, my curiosity outweighing my fear. The hallway was empty, the flickering lights casting eerie patterns on the walls. I walked slowly, each step echoing in the silence. The creaking sound had stopped, but the tension in the air was palpable. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Returning to the classroom, I found a child's drawing on my desk. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The drawing depicted a scene from my nightmare the previous night. A dark figure standing outside my window, watching. Panic surged through me. How did this drawing get here? Who could have known about my nightmare? The next evening, November 9th, I returned to the classroom, driven by a mix of fear and determination. The rain had subsided, leaving the air crisp and cold. As I entered the school, the halls felt unusually quiet, almost as if the building itself was holding its breath. I made my way to my desk, my eyes scanning for any signs of disturbance. The child's drawing from the previous night haunted my thoughts. I placed it in my bag, deciding to keep it as evidence. As I settled in to grade more essays, the unease from the night before returned. I glanced at the clock. It was 8 p.m. The shadows seemed to lengthen, and every creak of the building sent chills down my spine. While I tried to focus, a soft rustling noise came from the corner of the room. My heart pounded as I turned to look. There, partially hidden behind a stack of books, was another drawing. This one showed the dark figure standing at the classroom door, its eyes red and menacing. My breath caught in my throat. How was this happening? I decided to check the hallways again, hoping to find some clue. The corridors were dim and empty, the silence almost deafening. As I walked, I noticed a faint light coming from the end of the hall. My curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously approached. The light was coming from the janitor's closet, which was usually locked. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, revealing a small, cluttered room. In the center, an old TV flickered, playing static. Papers and cleaning supplies were strewn about, but there was no sign of anyone. I felt a cold draft and shivered. My gut told me something was very wrong. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small notebook on the floor. Picking it up, I realized it was filled with more drawings, all depicting the same dark figure. Each page seemed to tell a story of its own, with the figure getting closer and closer to various locations in the school. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, the final drawing showing the figure standing right behind a teacher's desk, my desk. Panicked, I dropped the notebook and ran back to my classroom. My mind raced with thoughts of who could be behind this and why they were targeting me. I locked the door and sat down, trying to calm my breathing. The clock read 10 p.m., and I knew I couldn't stay much longer. As I gathered my things to leave, I heard the soft creaking again, closer this time. The fear was almost paralyzing, but I forced myself to move. I needed to get out of the school and find help. I exited the classroom and made my way to the main doors, every step filled with dread. November 9th had left me with more questions and a deep sense of unease. On the night of November 10th, I returned to the school with a sense of dread that had only intensified. The events of the previous nights were too bizarre to ignore, and I felt compelled to uncover the truth. The air was colder than before, and the school's silence was oppressive. I entered the classroom, hoping to find some explanation. As I graded papers, the familiar unease settled over me. I kept glancing at the clock, which now read 9 p.m. The shadows seemed to shift and move, playing tricks on my eyes. My mind raced with the possibilities of what might be behind the strange occurrences. Determined to find answers, I decided to explore the basement, a place I had always avoided. The basement was even more foreboding than I had imagined. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. The steps creaked under my weight, each sound echoing ominously. As I reached the bottom, the darkness seemed to swallow me. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. I moved slowly, my flashlight revealing old equipment and forgotten storage. Suddenly, a noise behind me made me freeze. I turned, the light trembling in my hand, but saw nothing. My heart pounded as I continued down the narrow corridor, feeling more vulnerable with each step. The walls felt like they were closing in, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Finally, I found an old door at the end of the corridor. The knob was cold and stiff, but it turned with a creak. Inside, the room was filled with old desks and chairs covered in dust. In the center of the room, an old wooden crate caught my eye. I approached it cautiously, my flashlight revealing more children's drawings scattered around it. As I opened the crate, I found a stack of old student records, hidden away for years. My hands shook as I flipped through them, finding names and dates that corresponded with Emily's diary. The records detailed mysterious disappearances and unexplainable events that had been covered up. My fear turned to anger as I realized the extent of the deception. Lost in the records, I didn't notice the door slowly creaking shut behind me. When I finally looked up, it was too late. The door slammed with a loud bang, the sound echoing in the confined space. My flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The whispering began again, louder and more menacing this time. My heart raced as I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the thick walls muffled my cries. The basement felt colder, and the air seemed to grow thicker, making it hard to breathe. I sank to the floor, my mind racing with fear and desperation. November 10th had turned into a nightmare. I was alone, trapped in the dark, with no way out. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this didn't want me to leave. Hours seemed to pass in the cold, dark basement. My phone had no signal, and the battery was running low. I tried to remain calm, but the relentless whispering gnawed at my sanity. My mind raced with thoughts of who could be behind this. The school's history of disappearances and strange events haunted my thoughts, amplifying my fear. I rummaged through the crate, hoping to find something useful. Among the old records, I found a small flashlight, thankfully still working. Its dim light was a small comfort in the oppressive darkness. I shone the beam around the room, searching for any means of escape. My eyes landed on a small barred window near the ceiling, barely big enough to crawl through. With renewed determination, I stood on a chair, trying to pry the bars loose. They were rusted and fragile, but still firmly in place. My efforts seemed futile, and the whispering grew louder, almost mocking my desperation. Exhausted, I slumped against the wall, the cold seeping through my clothes. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a faint creak from the other side of the door. My heart leaped with hope. "Hello? Is someone there?" I called out, my voice hoarse and shaky. There was no response, but the whispering ceased, leaving an eerie silence. I held my breath, listening intently. Suddenly, the door creaked open, revealing a tall figure standing in the doorway. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The figure stepped forward, and I recognized him as Mr. Allen, the school's janitor. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. His expression was cold and distant, not the comforting presence I had hoped for. "Mr. Allen, thank God you're here." "I'm trapped," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't respond, simply staring at me with an unnerving intensity. I realized something was very wrong. The janitor stepped aside, revealing a group of shadowy figures behind him, their faces obscured by darkness. Panic surged through me as they entered the room, surrounding me. The whispering returned, now louder and more distinct. I recognized the words from Emily's diary, the warnings about the secret society. They had found me, and there was no escape. My mind raced with fear and regret, realizing too late the danger I had walked into. The figures moved closer, their intentions clear. I tried to fight, but it was no use. The cold grip of fear paralyzed me. The events of November 11th would never see the light of day. My fate was sealed, and the school's dark secrets would remain buried, just like me. The following hours were a blur of fear and confusion. The shadowy figures surrounded me, their presence overwhelming. Mr. Allen's cold gaze remained fixed on me, his silence more terrifying than any words. I struggled to understand why he was involved, but my thoughts were interrupted by a sharp pain as one of the figures grabbed my arm. They dragged me out of the basement and into a hidden corridor I had never seen before. The walls were lined with old photographs and documents, evidence of the secret society's long history. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the extent of their influence within the school. This was more than just a cover-up. It was a deep-seated conspiracy. As they led me further into the dark passage, the whispering grew louder, echoing in my ears. The fear was almost paralyzing, but a small part of me clung to the hope of escape. We entered a dimly lit room filled with old artifacts and symbols I couldn't understand. At the center of the room was an ancient-looking table, covered in strange markings. They forced me into a chair, and I felt the cold metal restraints snap around my wrists. Mr. Allen stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What is this all about?" Mr. Allen ignored my questions, turning to the others. "We can't let him leave. He knows too much." The other figures nodded in agreement, their faces still hidden in shadow. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of my situation. They had no intention of letting me go. The hours dragged on as they discussed my fate, their voices low and menacing. I pulled at the restraints, but they held firm. My mind flashed back to Emily's diary and the other students who had disappeared. I was just another piece in their twisted puzzle, another loose end to be tied up. As the night wore on, the realization sank in. I wasn't getting out of this alive. The fear was overwhelming, but there was also a sense of resignation. I had uncovered the truth, but it had come at a terrible cost. The events of November 12th would remain a dark chapter in the school's history, a tale of secrets and shadows that would never be told. As dawn approached, the figures moved in closer, their intentions clear. My heart raced one last time, and then there was only darkness. The school's secrets would stay hidden, and I would become just another part of its haunted past. On May 20th, 2024, I entered the school for what I thought would be a normal evening of preparing for the upcoming exams. The sun had just set, leaving the hallways bathed in a soft twilight. The school was deserted, the only sounds being the distant hum of the ventilation system and the occasional creak of the building settling. I was grading papers in the art room, a place known for its bright colors and vibrant student projects. The room was cluttered with supplies and artwork, creating a lively atmosphere. But tonight, it felt strangely empty, as if the walls were closing in. I glanced at the clock. It was 8 p.m. The solitude felt oppressive, and an uneasy chill ran through me. As I worked, I noticed something unusual. A single sheet of paper lay on the floor, partially hidden under a stack of art supplies. I picked it up and saw that it was a detailed sketch of the art room, with one particular detail that stood out: a shadowy figure in the corner of the drawing. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen anyone else in the room, and the sketch was unsettlingly accurate. Trying to shake off my growing discomfort, I returned to my grading. But the feeling of being watched persisted. I glanced around the room, my eyes darting over the paintings and drawings, each one seeming to come alive in the dim light. The shadows on the walls grew longer, more menacing. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced around the room. I stood up, my anxiety mounting. I walked over to the window, looking out into the empty courtyard. The night was still, the only movement the occasional swaying of the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Just then, the door to the art room creaked open. My pulse quickened. I walked over cautiously and peered into the hallway, but it was empty. I was about to return to my desk when I noticed a strange, old key lying on the floor just outside the door. It was brass, with an intricate design that seemed oddly familiar. I picked up the key, feeling its cold weight in my hand. The strange feeling of déjà vu washed over me. It seemed to belong to something old and forgotten. I decided to investigate, hoping it might lead to an explanation for the unsettling occurrences. As I held the old key in my hand, the eerie atmosphere of the art room seemed to intensify. The shadows on the walls appeared to shift and writhe, and the once familiar sounds of the school now felt foreign and unsettling. I glanced at the key, wondering if it could unlock something hidden within the school's labyrinthine corridors. The key's ornate design struck me as strangely familiar. I pocketed it, deciding to investigate further. I wandered through the empty hallways, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the only sound breaking the silence. My footsteps echoed in the deserted corridors as I searched for anything that might match the key. Eventually, I found myself in front of an old, forgotten storage room in the basement, a place I had never entered before. The door was rusted and creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was filled with dusty furniture and forgotten relics. In one corner stood a large, ornate chest, its surface covered in cobwebs. My heart raced as I approached the chest, the key still heavy in my pocket. I inserted it into the lock, turning it slowly. The mechanism clicked, and the lid creaked open, revealing a trove of old documents and photographs. I carefully examined the contents, my flashlight casting eerie shadows across the papers. Among the documents was a faded map of the school, with several rooms marked in red. One of the rooms was labeled with the same symbol as the key. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this might be the key to uncovering a hidden part of the school's history. My curiosity was piqued, but also overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. On May 21st, 2024, with the map in hand and the key securely in my pocket, I ventured back to the school. The sense of anticipation was palpable. I followed the map's instructions, navigating through the dimly lit hallways to the marked room. My flashlight cast long shadows on the walls, adding to the tension. The room was located in an old, seldom used section of the building. The door was heavy and ancient, with intricate carvings that matched the symbol on the key. I inserted the key into the lock, my hands trembling slightly. The lock clicked open with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. Inside, the room was a time capsule of forgotten history. Dust-covered furniture and old files filled the space. I moved cautiously, the beam of my flashlight revealing rows of dusty shelves. The air was stale, carrying the scent of old paper and decay. Among the scattered documents, I found a journal. Its leather cover was worn, and the pages were yellowed with age. I opened it carefully, reading the entries that detailed the secret activities and hidden agendas of past school administrators. The revelations were unsettling, pointing to unethical experiments and cover-ups. As I read, I realized that the school's dark past was more than just hidden. It was deeply embedded in its very fabric. The last entry was particularly chilling, hinting at something still lurking within the school. My heart raced, the mystery only deepening as I closed the journal. I knew I had uncovered something significant, but the true extent of it was still unknown.